the battle continues. The end of another shift.
How am I feeling? I would say, honestly, I'm a bit angry right now.
We had a busy night last night. We have almost full capacity in the intensive care unit.
It doesn't seem like it's slowing down, although we've had a little, I don't want to use the Q word, but a little lull right now, which is good because we're able to catch up and get some patients upstairs to the ICU.
It appears that people have forgotten that we are in the midst of a public health crisis. I don't understand why the sidewalks, the paths, the parks are filled with people, with groups of people. I don't understand why there is a dog birthday party happening in the park near my apartment. If you saw this, if you saw what we were seeing here in the hospital, I don't think you would be taking these risks.
Today, our patients are very stable, but we've learned with COVID, that can change quickly. This is unlike any respiratory illness I've seen, where their saturations decrease quick, their work of breathing increases quick, and they need help fast.
I was able to spend 7 or 8 minutes on the phone with my patient's family and have the phone on the loudest setting possible so that I could put it up to his ear. And I just let the family talk to him and console him and share how much they love him and are rooting for him to get better. And I honestly think that the patient benefited from this communication.
We have data that shows now that social distancing works. We look at the doubling time for new cases and for deaths, and we're seeing these doubling times increasing, which is a good sign.
We all support each other. I am so proud to be a nurse during this time because I get to see what it really looks like when a group of strangers come together with a common goal of helping and healing the sick.
Please don't take this progress for granted and have a false sense of security that it is okay to stop practicing social distancing. Social distancing only works if we all participate.
Let's hope we reach that plateau at some point soon, or we flatten the curve. I'm hopeful. Take care.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.